is Oliver Luck. He was a star quarterback at West Virginia, drafted 44th overall in the 1982 draft by the Houston Oilers. Third quarterback taken after Art Schlichter and Jim McMahon. He played 5 years in Houston, and most of which is a backup to Hall of Famer Warren Moon. We're going to fast forward to today. This is Oliver Luck, the XFL commissioner. First year, the debut, the inaugural season. Before we get to the XFL and the Seattle Dragons, I got to ask you about your playing days behind Warren, along with Earl Campbell, which I think is very cool. How was it back then playing the NFL?
Well, it was the 80s, which is a totally different era. Warren came down, of course, after not being drafted out of UW. I mean, think about that, right? A guy who ended up playing 20 years in the National Football League, undrafted, so he went up to Edmonton. He threw, and in my mind, I think, still throws one of the best balls ever. It was so catchable. He's a smart guy, great quarterback, still a very good friend. I just ran into him literally a couple nights ago in Houston at a function. It was a different era, but those were tough guys. Earl was an unbelievable running back, one of my top three, along with Jim Brown and Barry Sanders. I think those three were the best.
Good choices.
Yeah,
good choices.
And Earl had a short career.
Yeah.
And in today's world, he would have taken probably much better care of himself, or others would have helped him take care of himself. But what a unbelievable athlete, and deserving of all the awards that he has, as is Warren.
I know one more question about Earl, because as a kid watching him, I was like, man, this guy, the tearaway jerseys, he would carry guys, he would bowl them over. Do you remember a certain run or a certain highlight from Earl that's one of your favorites?
He actually caught screen passes out of the backfield pretty well. He was wasn't a great pass catcher, but screen pass short, real soft. He would catch it. Nothing like seeing the back of Earl take off on a screen pass with 3 or 4 big linemen in front. The one thing I did like about Earl, he wouldn't learn your name until you got into your second year. So my rookie season, he would just call me 10.
What do you call you, 10, your number?
Yeah, 10. Because he just didn't bother, somebody turnover in the NFL, he would wait until a guy made it, sort of in his second year, and then he would start calling me Luck.
Okay.
It was awesome. That was a sign of respect.
That's good. All right, so let's get to the XFL now. You go from the NFL playing career, you transition, you get your law degree, all these great things happening in your life. What appealed to you most to become the XFL commissioner?
So I love football, like most Americans, I guess one could say. And the opportunity that presented itself when one of Vince's people reached out, and I said to myself, gosh, a brand new football league that's well funded and has got a leader like Vince. And one of the things I liked about Vince, after you get to know him, you realize, oh gosh, he's a real visionary. He's a great business person, building up WWE into this hugely successful company. But the fact that he did this back in 2001 with the first iteration of the XFL told me that he learned from those mistakes. And there were some mistakes made back in 2001. So we had some great conversations. He assured me that I would be able to kind of build the league the way I want to build it. I love the game. I respect the game. I want to build it sort of in a proper, sensible fashion. I want to make sure that safety is important. We're worried about safety for our players, and we play this up-tempo, fast-paced game. I wanted to kind of hire guys like Bob Stoops and Jim Zorn, here in Seattle, and he's allowed me to do all of that, and that's pretty much what he had pledged to me. So the opportunity to work with a guy like him and kind of have my fingerprints on a startup league, brand new, I think was too hard to turn down.
Yeah, well, you talk about Stoops, Jim Zorn. How important was it for you guys to get some notable names, recognizable names to help launch this?
Well, very important, right? Because I wanted names that people would recognize and people would have respect for, because with good coaches come good players. Who wouldn't want to be a quarterback and play for Bob Stoops? He had a couple of Heisman Trophy winners when he was at Oklahoma, and then, Kyler Murray, and who's the other great player that was there recently? It's Baker Mayfield, right? Yeah. Who wouldn't want to play for, Bob? So we wanted to make sure that we had guys who were, well respected in the football community, but also the red thread with all those guys is they're offensive guys that know how to play fast. Kevin Gilbride, former OC, up with Eli at the Giants when they won those Super Bowls. Mark Trestman down in Tampa, known for his sort of creative, and up-tempo offenses. So we wanted guys who really would focus on the offensive component and play fast and hopefully score a bunch of points.
All right, well, you're in Seattle, so the Seattle Dragons are outpacing the rest of the XFL in ticket sales. Outpacing, which means there's a lot of excitement around this team. How excited are you to see that kind of excitement with the fans?
Oh, it's awesome. And we're doing this for the fans at the end of the day, right? Vince would say that, he's doing this because of his love of the game, his love of football, and ultimately you need fans to make it all work. I think this is one of the most underappreciated sports towns in America. And I've been in the MLS business and came up with the Houston Dynamo. I was the president there, and we played many games against the Sounders, 30, 40,000 people. Unbelievable atmosphere. I've been up here for Seahawks games, playing against, my son's team. I've been at UW games when Stanford would come up and play UW. Great atmosphere, right? And the NHL figured it out, and they're launching the new hockey team. This is a great sports town, and I think that we're actually fortunate to be here and fortunate to have been able to have done a deal with First and Goal to use CenturyLink, because what the Seahawks have done, starting way back when in the early 70s or mid 70s, I guess, right? 76 was the first season, is remarkable. And people know good football, they expect good football. It's up to us to offer that good football with the Dragons.
Yeah, well, they're expecting over 20,000 fans for that season opener, the home opener, I should say, which is going to be February 15th, which is a Saturday, which I find interesting because the Dragons are going to open in D.C., then they come that second week of the season and open at home. But I find it interesting that you're going to be playing on Saturdays and Sundays.
Well, we've got 4 games a weekend, so we'll have basically 2 games Saturday afternoon, sort of a la college football, and 2 games Sunday afternoon, a la the NFL. So I think that makes some sense. We got great, powerful broadcast partners in Fox and Disney with ABC and ESPN. So I think we'll be easy to find because we'll be on over the air and fully distributed cable stations. So we're excited about that. We'll have probably the best platform in terms of visibility that any startup league, let alone a startup football league, has ever had. But coming out of the college world where I spent a lot of time, most conferences, I was in the Big 12 with West Virginia. You've got your ESPN package and then your Fox package, and they learn to cooperate and they respect each other. And a lot of those guys move from company to company, producers and directors and camera guys and all that. So we're blessed, to have really two great media companies. For both of whom football is very important, right? Fox built, in a sense, its network off of the NFL.
That's right.
Go back to the 90s.
Yeah. And
of course, ESPN, enough said about football.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they got thousands of games every year. Right?
No, I know, but the NFL's got multiple networks as well. But you see what happened to the AAF. When they first came out, they weren't funded, and it just went, and it's tough. You really have to have that backing. And I know what I like about your approach and the XFL's approach is that you're not in this for one season. You're not in this for some splash.
Well, I think that's one of the. I'm sorry to interrupt. That's one of the things that Vince did learn, right? They did. It was a one and done. It was like college basketball, one and done. Back in 2001. This is going to be a 3-4 year build, right? Because it's going to take that long to get our franchises established, have a profile in the community, to develop an audience. I think it's going to take, we love football, right? It's our nation's #1 sport, but it's still nonetheless going to take a little bit of time, and Vince is in this for the long run.
Let's talk about the training camp. I thought that was a neat concept too. Was that a think tank that you guys came together and said, let's put all 8 teams in the Houston area and let's have one big old training camp?
So we talked about it. It's one of the things that I used to do when I ran NFL Europe, where you had teams that literally had 100% turnover, brand new teams. And in order to determine, hey, we might be weak at left tackle, we might have a weakness at wide receiver or cornerback, you have to practice against other teams. You can't just be practicing against your own guys. So it's exactly what we did at NFL Europe. It worked relatively well with that group. So we decided, after a 3-week sort of mini camp where a team was by itself in its respective city, that was December, then we brought them all into Houston for January. We just broke camp yesterday. In fact, I was flying up with a bunch of the Dragons players, and they were excited to get out of Houston, out of training camp, and get back to work in Seattle. But it made some sense because we did multiple scrimmages, multiple games, multiple joint practices, and then you see, oh, I might have a weakness there at nose guard, or gosh, we need a better slot receiver because that guy's not getting off, press coverage, or whatever it is. So that was something we felt pretty strongly about, and we think it worked pretty well.
Yeah, I found it interesting that even when the Dragons first set their roster, they had their kicker, I think, poached by an NFL team. And, did you see a lot of that as you guys formed your rosters early on?
Yeah, so we drafted back in mid-October, and we signed players early December. So between the mid-October and early December, it's sort of 6 or 7 weeks, we lost probably 30 players to National Football League teams, which is fine. Those guys had an opportunity. We said, go get it. So now they're signed they're under contract, they're signed. They're ours really through the end of the season. If they have an NFL opportunity after our championship game, April 26th, then they're free to take that. But at this point, they're under contract for our league, obviously. Yeah,
but what a great opportunity there, because as you say, your season will be wrapping up. These guys will be closing in on mini camps and OTAs, and they'll be at probably great shape at that point.
Oh, they'll be in tremendous shape. In fact, during the Houston training camp, we had, I don't want to say every NFL team represented in terms of the scouts, but a bunch of them were there. And they're going to be watching practice. They'll be watching every one of the games. We're not a league that's trying to create players or better players for the NFL, but that's certainly a byproduct of having good coaches and good training facilities and good players, because a lot of those guys will certainly end up in the NFL.
Right, because XFL is not it's its own league. It's not a developmental league for the NFL, but it's a byproduct. Like you said, there'll be a chance for some of these guys to continue their career, upgrade their careers
no question.
in the NFL.
No question. Same thing that we saw with the old XFL.
Right.
Tommy Maddox, if you remember that name,
Sure.
Former UCLA quarterback. He kind of created a great career for himself by having that one good season with the LA Extreme. I think he was the league MVP. He told me he's still the defending league MVP. I said, Tommy, nobody remembers that except guys like me.
All right, these guys, as much as they had to learn how to play together down there in training camp, there's new rules they have to get used to. Is that something, and I want to talk about the rules in a sec, but is that something you guys were kind of going through in training camp? Did they work on that at all, do you think?
Well, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out where could we innovate, where could we take what's already a great game, professional football, and make it just a little bit better. And so we came up with about a dozen rules or so. This is after working with coaches and focus groups and you name it, referees, health and safety officials. And we came up with about a dozen differences, and we think all those differences will make the game just a little bit better. And they're all sort of undergirded by a rationale, which is, will this help us play fast? We have a 25-second clock, for example, not a 40-second clock. And when you watch a 25-second clock and you watch teams, in a drive, it's fast. It's sort of like watching a Pac-12 or a Big 12 game when they're in their hurry-up mode. So we looked at a bunch of different things and kind of said we don't want to reinvent the game necessarily, because the game is great the way it is. But there are some places where we think we can make a difference. Our punt, for example, very simple to understand. In the NFL, the gunners, right, the guys on the outside, they leave at the snap. And they run down there to just take out that punt return guy if they can. We're holding our gunners. They can't leave until the ball is kicked. That gives a punt return guy about 2 extra seconds to catch the punt and make a move and return it. And fans tell us they want to see punt returns because it's one of the great plays in football. But so often it's a fair catch and you don't see that. So we're trying to be sensitive about safety, but also give fans what they told us they want to see, which is more punt returns, more kickoff returns, more trick plays. We have the double forward pass in there. We'll see how often that's being used. But we think all of those will help us, kind of play that up-tempo, fast-paced, ideally high-scoring game.
Well, will you have any effect on the kickoff returns? Are you going to hold them on kickoff returns as well?
Kickoff return looks totally different. And fans will see it and say, wow, that's a different idea. But the underlying rationale is, let's get kickoff returns. So we have a sole kicker who's back at the 30-yard line. He's kicking to a sole kickoff returner who's back at about the 5. And then both teams, the other 10 players, line up, one team at the 35, one team at the 30. Kickoff coverage team at the 35, kickoff return at the 30. Ball's kicked. Once the ball's caught by the return guy, then those 10 guys, 20 guys can move. So it's different.
You know what? Your players have to learn this, but your referees are going to have to learn this too.
We've been training the last number of months on this. But you're right. I mean, referees got to figure it out. And there's some individual rules in there. I would encourage folks to go to our website and you can see some videos of what that looks like. The point is, we're removing that sprint, the 30, 40-yard sprint, and that's what makes that a dangerous play, because that's where you get that big impact, right? Yeah. A guy sprinting full speed, running into a guy who's blocking them full speed. So we think we've made the play safer, and that we'll have almost 90% of those balls returned. And fans tell us they'd like to see the kickoff return because it's a fun play.
Yeah, that's one thing I miss in the NFL is when the kickoff is almost like, why not just put it down at the 25-yard line?
About 70% of NFL kicks go into the end zone, right? Because every NFL kicker's got a strong enough leg they can boot it through the end zone.
Sure. Well, what are you doing I see where you're going to, incomplete passes are going to, the clock's going to still run, and out of bounds still going to run. Right. Like you're going to, it's not a running clock, but it's pretty close to it until the 2-minute warning, right?
Right.
So this game's really going to move.
Yeah, so what we'd like to do is our goal, and this worked fairly well during our training camp as we ran these mock games, we want to have more or less the same number of plays you have in an NFL game, which is about 170, and compress that into a 3-hour time block, right? Because the game's now 3 hours and 20 minutes, 3 hours and 30 minutes. The national championship football game took like 5 hours. It was unbelievable, Clemson and LSU. It took forever. So we're trying to compress that. So we've got sort of a fast clock in the first quarter and then 13 minutes of the second quarter, and then there's a real slowdown with the 2 minute, right? And it's really, we call it a comeback period. So the clock will stop. You can't take a knee and kill 2 minutes of time. That's not a football play. Taking a knee, it's great when you're the quarterback and the winning team and you can do that, but it's not really a football play. So, we said, no, let's make that team pick up a couple of first downs if they want to maintain possession. So, again, the underlying rationale is this giving us more good, meaningful football plays. So in our mind, a kick out of the end zone on a kickoff, that's a meaningless play. That's when you get up and go get a hamburger or, soda pop or whatever. Same thing for a kneel down. That's not a real football play. So we wanted to, if we could, remove some of those meaningless plays and replace them with what we think are meaningful plays. And that's what fans told us they wanted to see.
Well, we're just educating fans on this XFL, and as we continue to educate them, I really like the three-tiered PAT system where, so explain that to us. You can probably do it better than me.
Sure. So you score a touchdown, 6 points, okay? Traditional. And then you have the option of a 1 point extra point, a 2 point extra point, or a 3 point extra point. They're all plays from scrimmage. There's no kicking with our extra points. So the 1 point's from the 2 yard line, you're pretty close. 2 point extra points from the 5 yard line, the 3 points from the 10. Hard to score from the 10. Mm-hmm. It feels very compressed. Hard to score from the 5, feels pretty compressed. We think it brings strategy into the game, and it allows a coach to decide, I'm going to go for 2, or I'm going to go for 3, I'm going to roll the dice a little bit. And anytime you can bring strategy in the game, we think it's great. Anytime a fan can second guess a coach, right? Oh, coach, you should have made a different decision in the second quarter when you scored on that pick 6. You had momentum. You should have gone for 3 and bury those guys. Anytime you can do that, we think it's good for the game.
Yeah, I thought that's one of the XFL rules back in the day. I thought they were a little bit innovative in their thought process, and I see that you guys are almost taking it to another level. I think it's really cool, really good idea.
There were some innovations back in 2001 that stuck. The Sky Cam, was an invention that NBC at that point and WWE was a joint venture made, and that's become a staple, right, for every football game, NFL or college. So we'll see how these all play out in terms of other people maybe using them. I did have in Houston some retired high school football coaches. Of course, you know how popular football is in that state.
Oh, yeah.
And they said to me, we really like that kickoff. We're going to take it to our coaches association and see if we can't, think about maybe changing the rule. It'd be great for high school kids. And it's about health and safety, certainly at the high school level. So there's some interesting things. I think fans will be curious and look for those. But at the end of the day, guess what? It's 11-on-11 football, same size field, 4 downs, the same blocking, tackling, throwing, catching, punting that we're accustomed to.
Yeah, because as a former player, and you've been around this game a long time, the integrity of the game still has to be in check. I mean, you can't just turn this thing to some kind of circus out there on a 100-yard field.
That's right. The 99% of the rules we have are the traditional NFL rules. Mm-hmm. Now, we have a couple of college rules that's 1 foot in bounds for a catch.
Yep.
And this was interesting. Players said to us they like 1 foot in bounds more because it's safer. When you drag both feet, you expose yourself. Just picture in your mind's eye, dragging both, all your toes on the sideline, and you're exposing yourself for a potential injury. And with 1 foot in bounds, the college rule, you're able to kind of use that other leg to sort of support yourself and fall into a traditional football role. So as we were going through these innovations and making these decisions, we realized, there were a couple of things that we didn't think about, but were ultimately sort of positive in terms of the effect on the health and safety of the players.
One last question about the rules, then we'll move on. But the overtime rule is unique too. Is that your idea?
That was an idea that came to us for a couple of reasons, and it's very much like a hockey or a soccer shootout. And of course, I'm an old MLS guy, so I like soccer shootouts.
Yeah.
The PKs at the end of the game.
Yep.
So we take the 22 starters of your team, the 22 starters of my team. If we're tied and go into overtime, and those 44 guys are the ones that fought and bled and sweated to get the game into overtime. They're the ones who decide overtime. So your offense is against my defense, 5 yard line, you run a play. If you score, you get a point. 2 points. Then I'm on, right? So we alternate plays, sort of like a shootout. And whoever scores more than the other guy wins the game.
Right. So they get 5. Each team gets 5 cracks.
They get 5 each from the 5 yard line, and it's tough to score from the 5.
Sure.
I mean, it's not easy, right? You pretty much have to throw the ball. It's it's a risk to run the ball, and we tested this with our teams, going back almost a year or so, and they love it. Guys love it because it's not a kicker. right? Those players, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, linebackers, the receivers, they're the ones that brought it. Let them decide who wins the game. Not necessarily just a kicker with a long field goal.
Yeah,
so,
and even this past season, you hear a lot of complaints about, the scoring that first touchdown doesn't give the other team a chance to counter.
Vikings Saints,
yep.
right? Vikings Saints with Kirk Cousins. They won the toss, marched down. Last year, it was the Patriots and the Chiefs. They went into overtime, AFC Championship game. Patriots won. Tom marches them down. They score, and the other team didn't even see the field. So we thought that's kind of fundamentally unfair, and we think this is a better way to have those guys who decided that overtime was necessary to decide overtime.
Okay, so I want to go through this in case people don't know this yet. The 8 teams: Seattle, D.C., New York, Los Angeles, St. Louis, Dallas, Houston, and Tampa. 8 teams is kind of magic number there. You kind of feel like there's going to be 10 games,
right?
And then there'll be 2 rounds in the playoffs.
There'll be two semifinal games.
Yep.
Week 11 and Week 12 will be our championship.
You get some nice cities in there. I mean, this is a bold. I mean, New York, Los Angeles. I mean, this is a bold move by you guys to go out there, because sometimes you try to go to the secondary cities, but you got to go where the interest is.
Our theory was that we want to go where there are lots of diehard, passionate football fans, and those markets, with the exception of St. Louis, which of course was an NFL market for 2 teams.
Yeah.
Those markets, including Seattle, there's lots of passionate fans. So we think that's really the group that as we build this league, we have in mind.
Well, I've talked to a lot of people in this town and even in this building that are very excited about going to the opener here on February 15th for Dragons fans. Expecting over 20,000, and they love the ticket prices too. It's $20 to get into these things, and for $100 you can have season tickets. I think that's a good start, man, because sometimes these NBA, the NFL, NHL, even they are more catered toward the corporations and the suites and things like that. This is kind of cool.
Well, that's important, not just to me, but to all of us at the XFL. Affordability is critical, and you shouldn't have to take out a mortgage, to go watch a football game. When my son was playing, my wife and I followed Andrew around to all these games, and spent a boatload of money, just buying regular seats,
Sure.
that were pretty pricey. So we're very happy we've got legitimate affordability for virtually every economic group. So for $20, you can sit in the lower bowl of CenturyLink and enjoy a great football game. Can't beat that.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, just so people know, they're going to drape off, I think, the top level for that game.
We won't sell the top level.
Right. So it's all lower level. So for $20, you are getting lower level seats. It's going to be. There's some local flavor on these rosters as well. What other cities are you seeing that are jumping like Seattle?
So Seattle's jumping. It's remarkable the job that the front office, Ryan Gustafson, are doing. St. Louis is selling very well. They're excited. There's a little bit of anger as well against the Rams for whatever reason. Imagine that. So we think that'll be a good market. I think both Texas markets, Houston and Dallas, will do well. People just love football down there. I mean, it's just it's such a tradition, such a custom to go to football games. Tampa, I think, will do fairly well also. The interesting one's going to be D.C. We're playing in the MLS venue in D.C., Audi Field.
Oh, okay.
Brand new. They just opened it up last year where D.C. United plays. It's tight, 20,000. And if we can get 20,000 or so in that building, that'll be a great sort of atmosphere, because it'll look major league, if you will.
That'll be cool. That's what a lot of people say about playing at Arrowhead Stadium, that it's the fans are right on top of you. It's an older stadium,
right.
and
it's loud.
Yeah. So when you look at this, because I'm sitting here talking to you and I see how the excitement that you have about this league. How did you handle skepticism out of the gate, and how do you continue to handle it when they say, can a spring football league really, really succeed?
Skepticism is warranted. There's no question about it. You think about all the spring leagues over the years, that have come and gone. And so we've learned lessons from them. We've studied a lot of them. We think that, the model that we have is a model that can work. I also think, you take the old XFL 2001, it's a different era now. I think we're seeing some of the most unbelievable football being played at the NFL and at the college level. It's incredible athletes. And it's hard to make an NFL roster. It really is difficult. So, I think there's just a sort of a surf fight. Is that a good word? A surf fight of talent, that just isn't quite good enough to make an NFL roster. Yeah. And, look at a guy like Russell. He'll play another 10 years. So that's taking one quarterback position out of the market in a sense, because you've got a great player like Russell, right, filling that spot. So I think there are, I guess this is bad grammar, more better players that are available for us that can really play well, can play fun, up-tempo, fast-paced game. Good coaches like Zorn and Stoops and Trestman and these other guys. I give ourselves a fighting shot.
Yeah, well, I think so too. I think you're doing everything right out of the gate for sure, and great funding, as you mentioned. And I want to ask you one last question about Jim Zorn. I mean, I'm sure as players coming into this league, they get to play for guys like Zorn and other NFL coaches that have been in the league and been around. Are you seeing that kind of magnetism around Zorn?
Yeah, I mean, guys love him, players love him. You know, I didn't quite realize, I knew this, but I guess I had sort of forgotten. I didn't realize how much of a legend he is, you know, here in the Seattle area.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And, you know, that's my era, the 76 expansion Seahawks and 77 and 8 and all that. He's done a marvelous job. He's put together a good, very good coaching staff. You know, we wanted also some local context to some of our coaches. So, you know, Kevin Gilbride is our coach of the New York Guardians. And, of course, you know, he was known by most fans as being the offensive coordinator when the Giants won the 2 Super Bowls with Eli. So people up there remember Kevin. You know, he's also an offensive guy, very creative. So we wanted to make sure we had some local connections. Bob Stoops in Dallas, right? Dallas ain't far from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, North Texas might as well be sometimes in Oklahoma with as many players as they send up there.
Sure.
So, you know, everybody's got a little bit of a connection. Winston Moss, our head coach in L.A., he was a former Raider.
Yeah.
You know, when they were in L.A. And so
he had a cup of coffee with the Seahawks too. I always thought he was an interesting character.
He is the most interesting of our 8 head coaches.
Yeah.
he's doing a great job. And Norm Chow, you know, is calling plays for Winston. Of course, everybody in L.A. who's interested in football knows who Norm Chow is.
Right.
You know, Norm is also very creative in terms of the offense. So we've got a good group of guys calling plays, head coaches. I give ourselves a fighting chance.
Yeah, I do too. I think everything's going in the right direction for you. You give the final word. Anything you want to say before we close this out?
I will say that I'm looking very much forward to the home opener here in Seattle.
Okay.
I'm planning to be here. I'm trying to convince my son to come. You know, but I can't wait to see, you know, that lower rung just packed with passionate Seattle fans.
And as the commissioner, you're probably going to make it to every venue you could possibly make it to, huh?
I've got a lot of travel coming up the next 12, 13 weeks. Let's just say that.
Well, enjoy it, man. That's going to be a lot of fun. It's great having you on. Appreciate it,
Paul.
Oliver.
Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
You bet.